Walk into a dying Canadian mall and the first thing that hits you is the silence. These were built to be loud, full of music, footsteps, voices, the hum of 100 conversations. They were the cathedrals of a different era, vast, climate-controlled palaces where whole communities came to shop, meet, eat, and simply be around each other, especially through the long Canadian winters. Now walk through one and you hear your own footsteps echo. Metal grates pulled down over unit after unit, fountains switched off and dry, a food court with more empty tables than a stadium at midnight, a single flickering light over a directory of stores that mostly don't exist anymore. Maybe one or two shops still hanging on, their staff staring out at an empty corridor. They're rotting, not overnight, slowly, floor by floor, unit by unit, until the whole enormous building becomes a monument to something that ended. And the reason why is more than online shopping, because these buildings aren't just failing as businesses. They're telling you a story about what happened to the Canadian middle class, and once you see it, you'll understand why the dead mall became one of the defining images of this decade. To understand why the mall is dying, you have to understand what it actually was, because it was never just a collection of shops. The mall was a machine with a specific design. At each end sat a large anchor store, a big department store or major retailer whose name pulled crowds in. Those anchors were the magnets. People came for the anchor, and on the way to it, they walked past dozens of smaller shops that survived entirely on that passing traffic. The whole ecosystem depended on the anchors drawing people through the doors. It was also, crucially, a middle-class machine. The mall was built for a specific customer, a family with steady income and a bit of money left over to spend on more than necessities. Someone who came not just to buy what they needed, but to browse, to treat themselves, to spend an afternoon and a bit of disposable cash. The entire business model assumed a large, comfortable middle class with time and money to wander. Hold on to that, because it's the key to everything. The mall wasn't built to sell necessities. It was built to sell the extras, to a class of people who could afford extras. And that class is exactly what's been disappearing. The first thing that broke was the anchors. Those big department stores, the magnets that made the whole machine work, came under enormous pressure. Some shrank, some vanished entirely. And when an anchor dies, it doesn't just leave one big empty box. It removes the reason people came to the mall at all. Watch the chain reaction. The anchor closes. The foot traffic it generated evaporates. The smaller shops that lived on that passing traffic start to die, because nobody's walking past them anymore. As those shops close, the mall gets emptier and less appealing, which drives away even more visitors, which kills more shops. One dead anchor can trigger the slow-motion collapse of an entire building. This is why malls don't fade gently. They tip. A mall can look fine, lose an anchor, and be visibly dying within a couple of years. The magnet that held the whole thing together is gone, and everything it was holding drifts apart. Now, the answer everyone reaches for: online shopping killed the mall. And yes, that's real, and it hit malls especially hard. The mall's whole pitch was convenience and selection under one roof. The internet offered more selection, from your couch, at any hour. For a lot of the browsing and buying that malls existed for, the internet simply did it better. That genuinely wounded the model. But here's the same limit we hit in the store closures video. Online shopping grew steadily over many years. If it were the whole story, malls would have faded gradually and evenly over that time. Instead, what we're seeing is sharper and more clustered. Malls that held on for years, suddenly tipping into collapse. Something accelerated the decline beyond what a slow online trend can explain. That something is the customer. Specifically, what happened to the customer's wallet. Here's the piece that gets missed. The mall didn't just lose customers to the internet. It lost the kind of shopping it was built for. Remember what the mall was designed to sell: the extras, the browse, the treat, the impulse buy, the afternoon out with money to spend. That's discretionary spending. And discretionary spending is exactly what vanishes when households run out of money. Think about how a squeezed Canadian family shops now. They don't wander a mall for an afternoon looking for something nice. They don't have the disposable cash to make that worthwhile, and they don't have the emotional room to enjoy it. When money is tight, shopping becomes a targeted mission. Get the specific thing you need, at the lowest price, and get out. And for that kind of shopping, a discount store or the internet beats a mall every time. So the mall lost its actual purpose. It was built as a place to pleasantly spend surplus money, and a huge share of Canadians no longer have surplus money to spend. You can't run a palace of discretionary spending in an economy where discretionary spending has collapsed. The building still stands. The customer it was built for is gone. And that brings us to the real reason the malls are rotting, the shocking one underneath the anchors and the internet. The mall was a temple built for the middle class, and the middle class is being hollowed out. This is the same truth as the Main Street video, but the mall shows it at monumental scale. Malls were the physical embodiment of post-war middle-class prosperity, enormous buildings that could only exist because there was an enormous, comfortable middle class, with money and leisure to fill them. They were prosperity you could walk through. So when you see a dead mall, you're not just looking at a failed business or a victim of Amazon. You're looking at the physical footprint of a middle class that no longer exists in the numbers it used to. The empty units aren't just closed shops. They're the negative space left behind by all the disposable income that drained out of ordinary Canadian households. The mall is dying because its congregation got poorer and stopped coming. That's why the dead mall is such a haunting image, and why people can't stop looking at them. On some level, everyone senses it. That echoing, empty concourse feels like the ghost of a prosperity we used to have. It's not nostalgia for shopping. It's grief for a middle class that could afford to. Let me make it real. Picture a small shop owner in a Canadian mall that's mostly dead. She's been there for years, back when this place was packed, when a weekend meant crowds, when her little store did steady business off all that foot traffic. Now she watches the neighbors go dark one by one. The anchor closed a while back. Then the units around her started emptying. Her own foot traffic collapsed, because nobody comes to a mall with nothing in it. She's one of the last few still open, running a shop in a building that feels like a tomb, paying rent for a location whose entire value, the crowds, evaporated years ago. She holds on longer than she should, the way small owners always do, because leaving means giving up something she built. But the customers aren't coming back, because the building isn't coming back, because the middle-class afternoon at the mall that fed it isn't coming back. Eventually she pulls the grate down for the last time, and the mall loses another light. And the people who work there, often local, often part-time, often the students and parents and older workers who rely on that kind of job, lose it. In some towns, the mall was one of the biggest employers around. When it dies, the jobs die with it. And a dead mall doesn't just sit there quietly. First, it's an enormous physical scar. These are some of the biggest buildings in many communities. When one dies, you don't get a tidy empty lot. You get a vast, decaying structure that's expensive to maintain, expensive to demolish, and difficult to repurpose. It looms over the community as a daily reminder of decline, and it drags down everything around it. Second, there's the lost gathering place, which matters more than people admit. For a lot of Canadian communities, especially in colder regions and smaller towns, the mall wasn't only commercial. It was the indoor public space, where teenagers hung out, where older people walked in winter, where the community physically overlapped. Lose it, and you lose one of the few places people from different walks of life actually shared. Nothing online replaces that. Third, there's the economic hole. The mall paid significant property taxes, employed a lot of people, and anchored an entire commercial zone. When it dies, the tax base shrinks, the jobs vanish, and the surrounding businesses that fed off mall traffic, the restaurants, the gas stations, the shops nearby, feel it too. The decay spreads outward from the dead building like a stain. And this is where the dead mall joins everything else on this channel. It's the same story as the shuttered Main Street, just bigger and more visible. It's the same story as the vanishing middle market store. It's the same story, ultimately, as the unsold trucks and the abandoned boats and the empty condos, a Canadian middle class that has been squeezed until it can no longer afford the life it used to live. The mall is simply the most dramatic monument to it. You can miss a family's quiet financial stress. You cannot miss a 400,000 square foot building sitting dark and rotting on the edge of your town. It's the balance sheet of the Canadian middle class, rendered in concrete and dead escalators. That's why these buildings haunt people. They're not just failed shopping centers. They're the ruins of a specific promise, that ordinary Canadians would have prosperity, leisure, and money left over to enjoy. The dead mall is what that promise looks like after it breaks. So where does this go? Some dead malls get a second life, converted into housing, offices, community space, warehouses. That's genuinely one of the more hopeful stories in this whole channel, turning a monument of lost consumption into homes people actually need, especially given the housing crisis. The best outcomes take these ghosts and make them useful again. But many just sit and rot, because repurposing an enormous building is expensive and slow, and the towns that lost the mall often lack the money to transform it. So they linger, vast, empty, decaying reminders of what the local economy used to be able to support. And it leaves the question this channel keeps arriving at. What does it mean that we built these enormous temples to middle-class prosperity, and then, one generation later, the middle class could no longer afford to keep them alive? So I want to hear from you. Is there a dead or dying mall near you? What was it, and what's it like now? Do you remember when it was thriving? And do you think these buildings should be torn down or turned into something new like housing? Tell me in the comments below. Tell me about the mall you remember. I read every one, and the memories in those comments say as much as any analysis. And if you want clear-eyed breakdowns of the forces reshaping life across Canada, subscribe to Canada Insider. There's a lot more of this story to tell.